Hello, this is Writers at Work, a podcast for readers and writers about the joys, heartaches, challenges, and satisfaction of the creative writing process. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Joining me on this episode of Writers at Work is Catriona McPherson, the author of 3 crime series, 1 a cozy, 2 of historical fiction, and standalone novels of psychological suspense. In 2024, she published Thrice, The Witching Hour, the 16th book in her Dandy Gilver murder mystery series set in the 1920s and 30s, Deep Beneath Us, a novel of suspense set in the Scottish Highlands, and SCOTZILLA, her 7th cozy featuring Lexy Campbell. I'll add here that Catriona contributed a very clever story with a twist to Brutal and Strange, the anthology based on the songs of Elvis Costello that I edited in late 2023. For her efforts, Catriona is the winner of the Agatha, Anthony, Lefty and Macavity Awards, high honors in the mystery and crime field. Born in South Queensferry, Scotland, Catriona earned her MA and PhD at the University of Edinburgh. She committed to writing full-time in 2005. 5 years later, she relocated to Northern California. As I was reminded at the recent Left Coast Crime Conference in Denver, I find Catriona to be a wonderful writer and a delightful presence. Though we work together on the Costello anthology and run into each other at various industry events, I've never had a chance to talk with her about the writing life. Thus, I'm so happy to say, Catriona McPherson, welcome to Writers at Work.
Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's go back to the early part of the century when you were working on After the Armistice Ball. What was the genesis of that book?
Well, I have told this story before, but if people haven't heard it, it is well worth hearing once. It was the book after the book that went in the drawer. So I was an academic and I'd been writing, scholarly writing for a while. So I wrote my first novel and there was no playfulness in the language. It was very thorough. It was very academic. It was deathly dull. And it got 40 rejections, which I thought was a lot at the time. And now I know people have racked up a lot more than that. But at that point, I put it in a drawer and thought I'll write something else. And I had resigned from my tenure track position in a university to write this novel. So I was freaking out. I was really terrified. And my husband advised me that I should boost my confidence a wee bit and write what I loved, just as a palate cleanser before I started to try again. And what I loved was Golden Age detective fiction. Agatha Christie, of course, Dorothy Sayers, Marjorie Allingham, Josephine Tey, Michael Innes, Niall Marsh, all that lot. So I thought, ha ha ha, they're all dead. Perfect. I'll write one of them as a palate cleanser. So with very low stakes, I wrote something that I had come to as a reader. So I'd consumed all the playfulness and inventiveness and bonkersness of those novels, and it came out completely different. And I'd had, writers will know what I mean by this, I'd had a good rejection in amongst the 40 for the first one of someone saying, I don't like this, but I quite like you. If you ever do something else, let me see that. And so I sent the After the Armistice Ball, my attempt at a Golden Age detective story, I sent it to her and she became my agent and she got me a publisher. So
what was the level of struggle for you when you were trying to do something that you hadn't done before? Did you take to it right away, or did you have to really discipline yourself?
I did take to it right away. I was a hopeless academic. Professor, you would call it, but in the UK system, you only get to call yourself a professor when you're a full professor. So I was really, really bad at that and very unhappy. So when I started to write, not the 1st of January, because I had to recover from New Year, let's say the 10th of January in the year 2000, I sat down, chapter 1, page 1, blank sheet, and I just wrote 2,000 words a day, 10 days a week. until I was finished. I didn't know what I was doing, so I was in that wonderful Rumsfeldian position of the unknown unknown. I was too
Right,
ignorant to
right.
be scared of what I didn't know. And it felt like such a joy after trying to be an academic. And that's never really worn off. Not every bit of any job is great, but it's my worst day as a writer is still better than my best day as an academic. And that was the worst thing I've ever done. Other things I've done includes cleaning pub toilets. I'd still rather do that than be a professor.
Well,
So no, it wasn't. It wasn't difficult. The second one was difficult. That was the second, not the so that would be the third one. The second one, that I had a contract for, that was the difficulty. But in that state of ignorance, ignorance of how it's done, ignorance of what anyone else had said about how it was done, ignorance of the business, ignorance of the market. If I'd known that people were writing those Golden Age detective stories then, here, I mean, I wasn't even the only blonde Brit in California doing it. There was Carola Dunn, Rhys Bowen, and Jacqueline Winspear. But I didn't know that. So I just cracked on with it.
I must say though that regarding academic writing, that your first novel that we're talking about, I found the writing superior to what we see in many first novels, particularly the precision of language and the sense of organization.
Well,
So
maybe there was a little bit of it still left.
yeah, yeah. So
When I'm
and
signing it, when I'm signing it now for people who still buy it, I say, "Read me gently. I was only learning."
right.
I mean, it was overwritten. It was overwritten.
Well, when I think of
It was
my
badly written.
no, I don't agree with you, Katrina. I think I stand by that. I think for a first novel, there's a lot to recommend. Um,
A lot of what did you say? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
a lot to recommend. I mean, I think,
Oh, well, thank you.
yeah, and
Yeah,
and
thank you.
and and I do wonder if that comes from the discipline required to do academic writing.
Might do. I've always thought it comes more from um, reading. We were just all at Left Coast Crime, and
Right,
Grace
right.
Kushida, who was the fan guest of honor, did the best slip of the tongue. She said, "I'm a ferocious reader." She meant a voracious reader, but I stick with that.
Ferocious, yeah.
Um, I think I mean, probably partly both. Yeah, I mean, well, I wasn't just a random professor. My first degree is in linguistics, and my PhD. My first degree is in English language and linguistics, and my PhD is in linguistics. So I'm really interested in language as
Right.
well as story. So there is some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you decided that you were going to be a novelist before you were a published novelist? That is to say,
yeah,
you cleaned away all other work, and that was going to be your career.
just about. I mean, I resigned. I took some part-time tutoring work with the something called the Open University. I don't know if you're aware of it. It's like a university of the air. It's all remote learning. I think it's been going since the 70s in Britain. So I did that to keep my hand in and earn some money. And I thought I'll get it out of my system if after 5 years, once I've failed, I'll go back and save my pension and, I'll just sit in my office and cry till I'm dead. But it worked out better than that, which is good. But yeah, I did blow up my career to do it.
Yeah. I
I
want to
wouldn't
go. Oh,
necessarily recommend it. Hmm.
well, there's something to be said for having your back against the wall to keep the
Yeah.
mind focused.
And
Um,
I had a supportive husband, I have to say, because it's no fun to live with someone who's crying all the time. So he decided he was happy to be a patron of the arts and support me um, through this 5-year plan of seeing if I could be a novelist.
yeah. You said something earlier that I'd like to go back to. Um, when I wrote my first novel, I had no idea what I was doing.
It's
And
great, isn't it?
yeah. And well, there is something in that book that I will never be able to replicate again.
Oh,
That innocence, that I knew no tricks, I knew no shortcuts. Basically, I just opened a vein and poured it onto the
mm,
page. And so
Yeah.
what you said about your second book is so fascinating. Were you self-conscious then, or were you feeling commercial pressures? What made you feel that the second book was difficult?
Well, several things, and I'll try and remember them all. The fact that there was a deadline. I love deadlines now. I'd ask for deadlines for everything, but there was a deadline. Also, the first book, the first draft, well, the turn-in draft. It was about the fourth draft. Three of the four people who read that first, my final draft, didn't know who'd done it after the end of the book. So I hadn't done a very good job. So I was very aware that I needed to pull it back to not be so obscure and not be so scared of being too obvious in the second book. And also by that time I had been to some workshops and I'd listened to other writers. So I'd heard, I'm doing bunny ears, how to do it properly, but I wasn't yet confident enough to know that there are lots of different ways of writing. So I was waylaid by people who plot and by people who say, character Bibles. I was speaking about this just, I mean, I'm a pantser. I just start at the top of the hill in a bathtub like Benny Hill and go wee downhill and write the first draft, and then I fix it later. It's like clearing up after a party. And a lot of people write that way, and other people, as you know, do meticulous plotting and chapter plans and character biographies. And I thought that the people who pants don't care what anyone else does, and the people who plot would like everyone to be a plotter. And I checked this out last Saturday evening at a writer's dinner. There were maybe about nine of us all in earshot. And I asked, and the plotters said, yes, we do, because the idea of pantsing makes us nervous, and even the idea of you pantsing makes us nervous. So we would be happier if everyone was a plotter. So I dutifully thought, oh, I better do it properly with the second one. Um, and it only lasted for three chapters, and it was really boring. So I just decided that I might nod and smile and try to look sage if anyone asked me, but secretly in my own office, I'd just do whatever I wanted. And then
Yeah.
then it was okay again. Oh, and also it just so happened that Stephen King had just written On Writing, and some of the stuff I'd made up for myself happened to be how he does it. And I thought, well, you can't say it's not a legitimate way to write. So, such as I write the first draft and I make everything up that I don't know, and then I do the research afterwards. That's what he does. And he doesn't talk about it to people um, when he's producing the first draft until the story's out, and that's what I was doing. So it just so happened that some of what he does is some of what I do, and then I felt vindicated. I felt I had someone at my back, and I didn't let myself be scolded into um, doing it the way that made someone else happy.
Yeah. So when you moved to the States in 2010, is that correct?
Yes,
And,
yes.
and how did that affect your writing?
Ooh, it was wonderful. Um, I happened to move to the States when I'd written book five in this historical series about a, gently born British amateur sleuth. And in book five, she goes undercover as a lady's maid in a grand house during the general strike. It was 1926 by this time. And so I happened to come to the US and try and shop that book around just as America and lots of other countries caught Downton Abbey fever. So I immediately got interest from US publishers, which I'd never had before. It was wonderful. And then it so happened that when I moved here, BoucherCon was in San Francisco. So I just popped down the road and met a whole slew of people um, and took it from there, really. Well, as well as finding out that there were three other British women on the west coast of America writing Golden Age style British detective fiction. That was a bit of a facer.
Yeah. Did home
But
seem
yeah, it's
far
gone pretty well.
did home seem far away from you? And you write um, often about home.
Yeah.
And now did home seem far away?
Well, it certainly did the first couple of years because I couldn't go home because we were on. Well, Neil was on I say he was on the genius visa because the reason it was a two-part plan. He's not as selfless as all that. I gave up my job, and that meant that he could move, and we were looking for one job because when academic couples move, they're always trying to find a university that wants both of them, which is a problem. So he came here on I don't know what it's called, that visa, and I came on what I call the chattel visa. I came because I was his spouse. And while we waited for our green card, we could leave, but then we couldn't come back. So that first 2 years felt really long and it felt very far away. But I had visits from family and also everything was new. So there was a lot of distraction. The COVID 2 years when I didn't go home felt much longer because it wasn't as exciting to be here then. It did feel far away, but I think maybe the linguistics came into play then because I was, then I am in the other Rumsfeldian state of I know what I know. So I knew
Right.
to protect my British English so that I didn't lose the ability to write books about there. They didn't get an American edge to them. Um, and I still wanted to write about it because it felt like what I knew. I'll whisper this. Sorry, my cat's here now, but I hope that's okay. I some people think I can make this trip to Rome tax deductible because I'm there 4 nights and I'll write a novel set in Rome. I'm not sure that works. So I knew it didn't seem at all possible that I'd ever be able to write an American novel. And it wasn't until been here 6 years that I wrote a novel set here. And even then it had a Scottish voice character. So I,
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
44 when I came here, and I just carried on writing where I understand how it works and I understand the landscape. And there's a depth of history that I get. I can look at a building and know what it was when it was built in a way that,
Right.
I mean, I can a bit more here now, but back then I wouldn't have been able to do.
I just wonder if a pantser is best served by being in the environment that she or he is writing about, where you don't have to be conscious of getting things of communicating what you see because you do that naturally because you're in the environment. Does
Yeah,
that does that make
I
sense?
think we're, yeah, I think we're saying the same thing in different ways, though, Jim, because I think the fact that I had been in that environment for such a long time and so immersed in it and could revisit it meant that I was more able to. I mean, I could be physically in California, but I wouldn't know
Right.
what I was looking at.
Right.
There would
Right.
be no depth of experience in California. And I still get things. I mean, just silly things like when we were buying a house here, which is mystifying. I genuinely thought that the realtor was taking us to a town called Escrow, where we were going to receive something to do with buying a house. I was
Right.
I was
Right.
just a lost lamb. Yeah.
So historical fiction. Um, you've now told us that you don't do your research until after the first draft.
Yeah.
Do you like doing that research?
Mm, not really. I like,
Oh my
well,
God, I'm
no, I don't
stunned.
see. This is why I do it. I can't work it out if you're being sarcastic or not.
No, I'm not.
I
I'm
am.
not.
All
You're
right, okay.
they're very
No, not really.
oh, they're so precise. They're so vivid.
Still like it. I still like it better than sitting in a faculty meeting. Remember?
Okay, I got you.
So I think what I do is I make it up. I make everything up. And if you make things up with enough gusto, enough brio and enough detail, nobody ever calls you on any of it. And then what I do is I check out what I've made up to see if it's possible. And if it's possible, it can stay. And only if it's absolutely impossible, I change it. And what I think that gives me is that I don't go for what's stereotypical. I think the danger for me would be because I don't love research. If I did the research first, I'd think, that'll do. I'll talk about that. I'll come at it that way. and I'd find the same stuff as everyone else because it would be on the top, it would be the
Oh,
first thing you Googled.
yeah.
So the way I do it, I do a lot of truffling around to see if the stuff I've made up can stay. I mean, I don't mind it. And so I mind when I realise that I've found something I couldn't have imagined and it's too good to not put in the book and there's going to be an awful lot of rewriting. I mind that because I know that if I did it the other way round, I wouldn't have written I wouldn't have written the novel without it. So I don't recommend it as a process because it takes a lot of time and it's wasteful. But the research, I mean, research was more fun before the internet was this good. When research really meant having to go somewhere and tramp around and sweet talk librarians. I preferred that. Because
Right.
one of my jobs when I was at college was I worked in the local studies department of Edinburgh City Libraries, and I found out what they had in their collection down in the dusty stacks. So, and it's reasonable to assume that every library everywhere's got similar kinds of material in their collection. So I knew what it was possible to find out, and I loved that.
Yeah.
My colleagues used to get really annoyed because it still, my former colleagues, it still felt wrong that they'd have to go down into the dusty stacks to get stuff for me. They really wished they could still just give me the key and tell me to go and do it myself. In fact, one of my proudest moments was when I made an archivist say, "Oh, for God's sake, Catriona, just make it up," when I was trying to check something out. That's not an archivist's first
No,
mood of the day.
no.
He
I
was so tired with bringing things out of the stacks for me.
no, Google
Yeah,
Maps.
I've changed my mind. I've talked myself into remembering how much I like it.
No,
But just Googling stuff is very boring.
no, and Google Maps too. I mean, it doesn't. You don't smell anything. You don't feel anything.
Exactly.
You know, I,
Exactly. You
I,
don't know, yeah, you don't know how near, even if you know how near the sea are, you don't know if you're going to hear
oh,
seagulls
that's
if you're just on Google Maps. Yeah,
I can't believe you said that. I walked up I'm doing a book set in the Vatican and walking up the steps of the Vatican, and I thought, my God, I can smell the river, and there are seagulls. I had
exactly.
no idea.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so
I don't think I've ever written a book in a place where I haven't gone there and sat on a rock and stared into space just to get the air.
yeah, yeah. So, after your eighth Dandy novel, I think I have this right,
Hmm.
you published As She Left It, right?
Yes,
It's a standalone. It's not set in a familiar place. It's not historical fiction. It's not of a kind that is of the other books you've written. It's a dark psychological thriller. Why the change in direction?
well, it looked like more of a change of direction than it was. I think because the first book I wrote, the one that went in the drawer that I mentioned, was much more similar to that. And I had written um, another two that didn't come out in the crime genre that were contemporary, but they were slightly more caperish. And
Uh,
then I wrote As She Left It, but nobody wanted to publish it. So it was much more like a zip or a zipper, as you would say, than it looks. It's just that eight Dandy Gilvers had come out before anything else in the crime genre got
I
bought.
see.
Um, and why why did I do that? Is that there was a story
Yeah.
that wouldn't work. There was a story that wouldn't work for Dandy Gilver. There was a story I wanted to tell that didn't need a posh detective. So I decided to come at it a different way.
Did
And then,
publishers? I'm sorry. Did publishers tell you why they didn't want it?
do you know, I can't remember. It was a while ago now.
Okay.
Um, do you know, I honestly can't remember.
Okay. Well, that's good.
But I was moaning about it. And there's a lesson here. Always whine out loud. I was moaning about it at Malice Domestic one time that I couldn't get. Oh, I can't get my book published. You know that kind of attractive way that we go on.
Oh,
And
I know it too well.
yeah, and an editor who I didn't know was an editor at the time. It was Terry Bishop of Midnight Ink.
Uh,
Pushed her business card across the table and said, "Send it to me." And I I don't know what I said, but I thought, oh yeah, okay, fine, whatever. And then she went off to the bathroom or to get a drink or something, and everyone else at the table said, she never does that. Don't, that's not nothing, because she never does that. She hides from people. That's why you don't know she's an editor, because if people do know, they get deluge. So I sent it to Terry at Midnight Ink, and she brought it out, and
Wow.
it did it did really well. I can't
Yeah.
remember if it was nominated for any awards. I know the second one was. The second one that she brought out, the second psychological thriller, was nominated for an Edgar, which was
Yeah.
great. Very exciting. Didn't win, but you know. Um,
I think, something, I think that that's when you and I met. I think
but
that
the Edgars.
I think I was a judge for that
Oh,
category.
well, thank you. Thank you, if you
No,
were.
no,
Thank you. And I know, and I joke in it because people here knew me, oh, people everywhere, anyone who did know me, knew me as a writer of these traditional historical detective stories. There was a bit of that, a dog walking on its back legs around me having written these modern, darkish psychological thrillers. I'm still
yeah.
surprised that nobody insisted that I use a different name.
You had a reader base by then, though, for the Dandy books.
Yes.
Did you fear you might confuse them or lose them?
Oh, because I mean, even this far in, I still didn't know much about marketing or the business of being a writer. I was really focused on the craft, so I didn't worry. I didn't worry about it. I was always pleasantly surprised to find out that there was someone who read both, and there were more people who did read both than I had
Oh,
expected. Maybe because they're all got in the Venn diagram, they're British, and a lot of people in the US like British fiction the same way as a lot of people in Britain like US fiction. I was an avid Lisa Scottolini fan before I moved here,
yeah.
for instance. Not just her, but definitely
No, no.
her. Yeah.
Yeah. Do have readers indicate that they see the various work you do as part of a whole? Do they like the fact that you go off and do what you want to do? Um, and they're just Catriona fans as opposed to a Dandy
Yeah.
fan or Lexy
There,
fan.
there's a big crossover. There are certainly people who don't want to read um well, there are some people in the past who thought I am Dandy Gilver. And then when they meet me, my God, can you imagine the disappointment? One time in particular, I went to address the Dorothy L. Sayers Society um, in Witham in Essex to be their keynote speaker for their annual meeting, and they were definitely expecting Dandy Gilver. They were not pleased when I got off the train.
Oh God.
Not to worry. Um, I think there's a big crossover, and I think there's a big crossover. There's some people who are just not interested in a posh detective in the 20s or 30s, and some people who just don't want to read about um, calamitous lives getting worse than they
Yeah.
started for
Yeah.
300 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who is writing and publishing as many novels of quality as you are. I'm sure there's people who
Oh.
publish a lot of novels that are mediocre. Um, so how do you parcel out your time? Uh, you know, do you move fluid?
Serious question.
Do you move
I think
fluidly from one to the other, or I mean,
no, God no. Jeez, no way. My husband, I mean, he's earned the right to say what he wants now after that all that early support. He says that my working method is like when the rocks move in the movie Labyrinth, and groaning and slowly, because he's a professor. He does 17 things every day and keeps all the plates spinning. I do one thing at a time, and if edits, if I'm halfway through a first draft and edits come in for something else, then I change everything that's on my desk and I pack that first draft away, leaving it somewhere where I know what's going to happen next so I can start again. And then I do just the edit until that's done. And then I go back to the first thing. So I can't mix it around like that. How do I do it? some of it is just still the gratitude that I'm not doing that awful job that made me cry anymore, and that I'm still getting to do this. I don't have children. I have very low standards for housekeeping. Um, and I don't have any particularly time-consuming hobbies. I mean, my hobbies are gardening, cooking, reading. Shocker. So I do work a lot. Although it's really, I mean, if people are listening to this who are writers, I think it's really important to exercise because, I've set a timer for half an hour and put my phone in another room so that I can't just switch the timer off and not stand up. So I stand up every half hour for, 2 to 10 minutes, and then I
Yeah,
start the next half hour again.
yeah. So,
Maybe
so
that's what it is.
you published three books last year, and you have another one coming
Yeah.
out shortly. Yes.
Yes, in the UK. One's coming in April in the UK. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
but you don't work on any of them at the same time.
Let me see if I'm being honest here. I don't think so. I certainly can't. There's the first draft, and then the huge mess draft with all the research in, and then maybe three more. Okay, but there's the draft before it leaves the house, before it leaves my desk, when nobody knows anything about it. And they are qualitatively very different from once other people are involved. So my agent edits usually, and when she tells me to do things, maybe I can do that maybe in the late afternoon after I've finished with my draft and I've had a bit of gone for a walk, and I do because it just comes from a different place.
Yeah.
Doing the edits that someone else has told me to do doesn't feel like I'm trying to get anything to come out of myself. It's more of a puzzle at that stage. Does that make sense to you? For you,
Yes, it does.
do you? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Good.
I,
Thanks.
you caught me in the bookstore the other day buying a couple of your books, and
Oh,
I read them both, and I can't say that I see a lot of commonality in them.
so was that the comedy and the dark one?
Yeah, I got
Yeah.
SCOTZILLA and Deep Beneath
Yeah.
Us. They're both in the first person that I see. I
Yeah.
think I recognize some of your technique in describing setting, but
Right.
if somebody would have said to me these are by two different authors, I would have believed them.
Huh. Well,
So,
they're bad examples because that comedy. So this is the third strand that I write this Scot out of water Scottish person moves to California and sets up as a marriage guidance counselor and becomes attached to a little private detective agency in a college town in California. So they're straight comedies, and that Scottzilla, it's about a wedding. That's probably the most straight comedy of all of them. And that book, Deep Beneath Us, is probably the darkest.
yeah.
Unfortunately, most autobiographical, but once it's been through the
Oh,
fiction mill, it doesn't show. Um, it's probably the darkest one I've ever written, and Scottsdale is probably the most light, bright, and sparkling one that I've ever written. So those are bad examples, but um, there's always a little bit of humour in the. Certainly, there's some humour in the historicals, and there's a little bit of, and I mean humour. I don't mean whimsy.
yeah.
Hopefully, cheerfulness or lightheartedness, because I think that's a really different thing. But there's some humour of some kind in everything. And usually there's a bit of darkness in the comedies, although not really in Scottzilla because it was a wedding and they're daft. It was great fun to write.
Right. Do you want to tap in? Do you want to tell us a little bit about the writing from an autobiographical perspective and fictionalizing it?
Yeah, well, yes, I will. I was on a panel just at the weekend there when we saw each other with Ellen Kirschman, who is a psychologist, and she was asking. I mean, she claims she doesn't give it away for free, but she was asking questions on that panel that none of us on that panel had ever been asked before. Um, I think, yes, I will. I think, how will I put this? I think if life I think if my life was grim now, then writing dark psychological thrillers where you know, really put these characters into terrific peril wouldn't be possible because it wouldn't be escapism. And I firmly believe that it's all escapism. I don't hold with this escapist fluff and gritty realism. It's all escapism. Some of it's dark, some of it's light. Murder is stupid and banal, and police work is boring, and so we don't write that. But I think from adulthood and a place of safety and someone who's enormously privileged and whose life's going okay, I can explore absolutely anything. And as I say, it's not, I mean, I've written things before that I've said are autobiographical, except that none of the people in them are real and none of the events in them ever happened. It's more um, the pathway through a life that I think is autobiographical. I mean,
Yeah.
nothing in that book ever happened to me. Um,
But
I think that's the best way to. And the comedies are different. The voice character in the comedies is the most me of anyone I write. She is a Scottish woman she's a Scottish woman who moved to California to marry an American and immediately got divorced. My husband is not American and I've never been divorced, but I had to get him out of the way so that she was on her own, so that she was in a way to find the found family, which is one of my favorite things to write. So that character is most me, but the books don't mine anything very significant from my life, just the setting. The setting is an extremely lightly fictionalized version of where I actually live. And
right,
some of her thoughts and feelings about California life, I've got to admit, are mine.
right.
I can always
Okay.
deny one in particular if people take issue with it.
But getting back to Deep Beneath Us,
Yes.
it's described as a psychological suspense story, and it is. I mean, no, you wouldn't want to be these people. You wouldn't want to
No,
be in this situation.
no.
I I think when these, this happens to, I don't want to give too much away, but a woman returns to her childhood home, and she's pretty down in the dumps, and then things get worse. Um,
That is such an understatement. You could be British, Jim, down in the dumps. Yeah. I don't mind saying, she has had a psychotic episode in her life before, and she is now in such a state of extremis that she wants it to happen again. She'd rather be off her rocker than having to deal with reality. So she's actively courting a psychotic break because she wants an escape from her life. I mean, this person is not having a good day.
no, no.
I have never had a psychotic break. I've never been overnight in a psychiatric hospital, put it that way.
Okay. No, I'm curious about your comment that you alluded to some autobiographical elements of the
Yeah.
story. What I found, the last novel I did, it was about something that happened to me 30, 40 years ago. And somebody said to me, well, why didn't you write about it before that? And I answered I answered as a writer. I didn't have any lightness to balance it with. It took,
Exactly. Yeah,
it took,
exactly.
it took me all these years of being a novelist to understand that, you can't bludgeon a reader with horror unless
Yeah.
there's some redeeming element to the story. So now you're tied into Tabitha. She's the lead character in the story.
Yes.
Is she the real Catriona McPherson also?
Let me think. I'll give a serious answer for this. Is she the real? She's probably she's probably very similar. I think she's more stoic than I am. I think she's braver than I am. I think she's luckier than I am. Her journey, oh God, is that true? How old is she? Her journey out of where we find her fits inside a novel. And that's not
Yeah.
often true. If you've
Yeah.
got to do an awful lot of work to climb out from where you are, that it wouldn't fit in a novel that takes place over, is it about 6 months,
Right.
maybe a
Right.
year, something like that.
Mm.
But her sensibilities, very much so. The other thing I keep coming back to, and I didn't. It's so obvious, and I didn't know this until my agent said, very off the cuff remark, is there's often a lost child or a missing child in my books. And my agent, when she was starting to read one of my books, just said, right, well, where's the lost child in this one? And I thought, what? And I thought, oh yeah, you're right. And she laughed. I mean, she cackled to think that I didn't know that that's what I write about over and
Oh
over
my.
again.
Oh my.
So at least to some extent, I mean, I didn't not cackled in a harsh way. She knew that I absolutely adore her, and I think I know it's mutual. But I think Tabitha, I wanted to write someone because sometimes in the past I've tried to write someone whose child is not missing, and it goes, I mean, spectacularly wrong usually. Like I wrote a character whose child wasn't missing, but he did have a severe degenerative disease, and he was in hospice care and he was dying. We can't control what we write. But this time, Tabitha Muir, I thought I am just going to write someone whose child is not missing, and I did. Although, as you know, having read the books, it's got to come out. Having read that book, it's got to come out somewhere, and it did.
And it did.
Um, so I don't think we're in charge of what our tender spots are. I don't think we're in charge of what our tropes are.
No, but what I think one of the things
Oh,
about that I'm most grateful for this career as a novelist is I've learned so much about myself that I didn't know until I wrote.
absolutely. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I'm
you know,
I'm one step behind you. I have to write it, and then someone has to tell me what I've written.
you
Um,
know, people often ask us, and I'm sure you get this because you're so productive and on a quality level. People say to you, "Where do you get your ideas?" As if
mm,
the ideas are
yeah,
residing someplace.
yeah,
And I think what you're alluding to is that so many of them exist within us.
yeah,
If
yeah,
we know how to A, find them, and B, know how to utilize them in
yeah.
a fictional form.
Absolutely. I mean, where I get my monster of the week ideas, the ideas like what's the crime going to be, or for Dandy Gilver, what's the setting going to be, is a very different question from where do we get our themes? Where do we get the stuff that we want to be digging into? Yeah.
Katrina,
I
I
mean,
could,
sorry, go ahead.
no, please. Where you got the idea for,
Where I got the idea for Dandy Gilver was the later Dandy Gilvers was realizing that I really wasn't an academic anymore, and I really was writing, and nobody could stop me. And if I wanted to set a book in a circus, I could set a book in a circus, especially because it
yeah,
was the 30s and there were circuses. And then I was off. I thought, hey, stately home, hotel, boarding school, a hydropathic hospital where people combine water and electricity in a way that doesn't seem very well, and it seems a bit misguided, but these were a thing. So it
yeah,
was that kind of nobody's going to stop me feeling of freedom there.
right,
But the themes of the thrillers, the suspense, I mean, some of it comes from this world that we live in and the truth about this world that we live in, the kind of um well, maybe not so much in California, people, there's not so much shame. There aren't so many secrets. People are very open about having therapists. I was on a panel with Audrey Lee, who's Chinese American, and she and I mean, I'm Scottish, she's Chinese American, but we are absolutely the same background of if you ever had to visit a therapist, you would tell no one because of the shame, which is not something that the West Coasters understood. So,
right,
I mean,
right,
some of it comes from this world that we live in. Yeah.
right, right. I was going to say that I could talk to you for hours about these things, but I have a sense that I'm keeping you from writing one of the next 5 books that you have to do in short time.
I am writing a psychological thriller. I'm on chapter 4, so it's at that trying to shovel the concrete before it sets stage. If that's how it is for you too, that's how it is for me.
Well, I'm looking
You know,
forward to it, Catriona. I'm a Catriona McPherson fan. I say so for the record.
thank you very much. You have said such kind things, and after
Ah,
15 years in California, I've learned to say thank you and not stop it. So thank you.
okay. My guest has been Catriona McPherson, award-winning author of cozies, historical fiction, psychological suspense. Catriona, thanks so much for joining me on Writers at Work.
Thank you, Jim.
Writers at Work is a production of Bliss Publications. Erin Mitchell is our producer. Music is by Joni Mitchell, performed by Keith Jarrett. For more, see writersatworkpodcast.com. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Until next time, happy reading.